Welcome to Podnutz Pro, show number 41. This is the show where Matt and I will take you from being a home PC repair technician, where we introduce you to the small business world. How you doing, Matt?
I am doing just fine, thank you. Looking forward to the holidays. How about you?
It's been a long week. Got a new position, so at work, so I have a data overload of all this information I'm trying to memorize and deal with, and it's just been a long week overall, I must say. But um, other than that, it's a holiday season, so can't complain, right?
Yes, yes. It's a long week. It's only half over, just so you know, not to make things worse, but
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate
okay.
that. All right, so what are we going to be discussing today, my friend?
All right, so I'm in the middle of doing some quite a few migrations. A couple of them are from Small Business Server 2003 to straight Windows. So if I would run their small business server, too many users need to move on to something that has more capacity for this company, or for a few companies actually.
Okay.
So the one I'm doing right now is about 70 computers, and they had one small business server, but that it does not work. So I doing this migration to straight server, I found a really good article on this, and the link, if people want to look at it, we can go through a few of the steps tonight, and I got some things to add to these notes, but a really great article from Demaster's blog, and I have a tiny URL, so tinyurl.com/pnp41. A little bit easier because it's a long link. That'll take you right there. So very interesting article. If you're doing this step by step, it lays it all out. So we'll go over the first few steps, probably to five, because I have a few things I want to add. Now the first part is standard for doing any kind of migration, not just this kind of any migration. Run all the updates on the server. Windows updates, Microsoft updates, you want them all the updates. And hopefully they've been done along the way, so you don't have too many. This server only had a few, so it didn't take very long. There's also a step in this step one
Okay.
that you want to run a health check on your existing small business server. And there's a link in the article that tells you to run the Small Business 2003 Best Practice Analyzer, which you hopefully would have run when it was first installed also, because usually when you install Server 03 Small Business, you want to run that analyzer to make sure that everything's set up the right way.
So what does the analyzer do? Check for the proper services are installed, the state of your server?
Yeah, it checks a few things, best practices. It says, if you have this setting this way, but it should be this way kind of thing. A few of those. Maybe DHCP doesn't have certain credentials, or just certain. It's really easy to read, and it actually tells you to fix this. Click here, so it walks you through it. At most, if your server's been running fine, you're not going to have much in there, and some of it's not really needed to be fixed, but it's a good idea to run it. There's also, you can run DC Diag on your Small Business Server 03. And that's going to give you a report, the health of Active Directory. If there's any errors, you can repair those, but usually you're not going to have anything going on there. But it's just just a thing before to make sure you don't have any problems.
Right.
Now, so, step two. Now, probably about a week or two ago, maybe longer, I put all the servers in the rack over there. So they've all just been in the rack, on the network, remote access enabled, and that's just it, sitting in there waiting for me to connect to do this stuff.
Okay.
So I'm connecting remotely to do all this stuff, basically. So in my instance, this is how to move the domain controller and the Exchange server. Prior to all this, we had put in an application server to run their main application.
Okay.
We put in a file server to move all their files to, just to do file and print sharing. And we had this server. So before I even did this part, we moved over their main application a few weeks ago. And once we moved that, realized Monday morning that something else didn't work. There was a program that depended on the one we moved. So that one was failing. So we had to hurry up and move that on a Monday morning and get that working. They have some licensed servers for certain programs that dish out licenses. So we moved all those. And we did all this weeks ago. So my last step is to move the domain and exchange. But before this, moved all this stuff. Now, they're going to have, let me see. Okay. So I moved all the file shares over last week to the new file server. And that's one thing I want to get into before I do these steps. I took this opportunity just to do some cleanup on this server because people have gone into their existing server and made all kind of weird changes to permissions. They might have made, we talked about before, where you don't want permissions on 30 subfolders to be different.
Right.
Because that's just a nightmare. So I took the opportunity when I moved the shares over, I created the same exact shares on a different server, but I just copied them over. Now there are ways, because I did not want to retain permissions. I wanted to just wipe them out. Now, if you want to retain permissions, you can use things like robocopy or xcopy. And when you move them from the one server to the other, you can have settings to retain the permissions, which some people might want. In my case, I did not want that. So I created the shares, created the folder structure, assigned the permissions that I wanted to the top level. So now when I copy from one server to the other, it's going to take over the parent folder's security settings and not retain them because you're moving from server to server. Also took the opportunity when I was looking through the permissions on the top level folders, they had maybe 10 or 12 different people with full access, some with read-only access. So I did some cleanup. I created some groups. So if, let's say one share, somebody had full access, somebody had read-only. I created groups called full access and read-only. Put the right people in that group. So now instead of adding 12 individuals, I can just add one group. So of course later on I can add the person to the right group when they have the permissions for the share.
Right, and what Matt is describing is a lot easier, as he stated, to manage groups, 2, 3, 4 groups than 70-some users or 100 or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, because I can look in Active Directory now and say, okay, you need access to the the AutoCAD share. Okay, well, if you remember AutoCAD group, you have access. So I just can add them to that group, and then I have to go browse to the share and see, okay, let me add you here, let me add you here. That's harder to do.
And also one key thing is if Bob or whoever gets fired or leaves the job for a better job, now instead of you trying to allocate what 55 folders Bob had access to, if you apply the whole group system here, you just remove them from a group and you're done.
Yes, and that's actually more common. People get left behind because somebody added the individual to the group and not through the group, but through the share directly. Anyway, that was a big mess. So I had to document all that, create groups, create the shares, copy the files over. Now I knew that there'd be calls that some people can't access, some people can't access that. I was expecting that on the Monday. And of course there were a few because I may have missed one or two, or I found some people were in certain groups like domain admin groups that shouldn't be there.
Really?
So I took them out of those groups. So some people were getting access because they were in groups they shouldn't have been. So when they called, I added them to the right group. So took care of that. Had a few people who, when they opened up Outlook, they were getting errors that their archived PST file couldn't be found because it was pointing to the old share on the old server, not through a drive letter, but through the UNC path. So, of course, it can't find the old server because it's not there anymore.
Now, for folks that might say, what is the UNC path? That would be the actual full path / server name. Let's say server 1 was the name of the old server. Matt puts a new server in, server 2. If it looks for server 1, not going to be there.
Right. So yeah, it was on // server name /share, all that stuff. Now, the majority of people were mapped. Let's say if they had an archive PST file, it might have pointed to U colon Outlook files, whatever.
A map drive.
Right. So I kept the same shares and I kept the same drive letter, so those would still work. But a few people had it mapped to the UNC path, so they didn't work. Now, sometimes it's better to be mapped to the UNC path, because if for some reason your drivelet doesn't map correctly, those people get an error because, hey, U doesn't exist. But if you have a UNC path, it will exist without a drive letter. So, but most of them had through a drive letter. So only a few people to fix there. And these same people had their auto archive settings to the full UNC path too, so I had to go change those, or else when they would have tried to archive later, they would have got an error.
That's surprising when you add a new server or migrate and the other one, the stuff that pops up, huh?
Yeah, and I found a lot of things that popped up that I didn't even know that were in existence in this location. Even though we made a list of everything that this small business server was doing, we still missed some because even the customer didn't know that that was running. But those things happen. Now, when I moved the shares over, so there's some default shares in small business server. There's a client app share. There's the user share. That's, I think, the two main default shares. So all the other shares, after I copied the data over to the new share, I just unshared it from the original server. I left the files there, but it was unshared, so they couldn't access it. That way, if they say they're missing something, I can go back and look for it. The client app share I copied over to the new server and a software share, but I left the share alone on the small business server because sometimes you'll get error if the client app share is gone. So I didn't want to get that error right now. The user folders, I kept the structure for the user folders, but the contents I moved to the new share. And that's because also the default user share wants to be there or else you get an error. Now, once I get rid of the small business server, it won't be an issue anymore. But for now, I left the small business server user shares there because I can see if anybody has their My Documents path or anything else saved in there. Now, for instance, the contents were completely empty on the Sunday night. Monday afternoon, there was some files in some user folders. Well, I found that somebody had a UNC path to this, so it still worked. So he fixed his UNC path, moved the file, so now he won't be writing files there anymore.
Okay.
Now, so once I got all that done, the user shares are fine now. The all the access new shares are created. Now, for now, right now they have a login script, which is something you put in the properties of the account. You put a login script. Once we're on server 08, we're going to be using group policy to map drives. But for right now, they have login scripts. So what I had to do was edit the login scripts, basically do a net space use / drive letter. So net space use space, let's say T colon space / delete. So I do that for every drive that I have. The first thing it does when it runs is delete the drive letters.
Right.
And then you can put the new ones in to map the new ones. That way they're sure to get the new shares for the drives. Another thing I did was in small business server, or actually in any server, you can do on the account properties the home drive, right?
Okay.
Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
I'm sure you are.
Yeah.
Okay. So in there, some people had home drives mapped. Same screen that you have a login script at the bottom is kind of a path. And it's either local directory or you can remap home drive to, let's say, always connect drive U to this UNC path share. I took all those out. I just put it back to local directory so they don't have that, because what I did in the login script instead, I did a net space use space U colon, I'm sorry, yes, net space U, but I mapped it to the share, the username, and then % username %. So what that'll do is it'll map the same U drive, but it'll map differently because it maps